We're talking about something a little bit farther back there. But at Facteus, we've really seen a huge opportunity to talk about how you interact with consumer transaction data in real time and how you put that in the hands of analysts and end users rather than just kind of getting it buried sometimes with engineers and SQL jockeys. So when I talk about real-time consumer spending data at Facteus, we're really talking about two main sources of data on our end at least. One of them is sourced from our panel of 120 million consumers in the US, where we track their credit and debit card spending patterns. So think of that as a full insight into a consumer's transaction history before and after a purchase, throughout time, and across their whole share of wallet. The other transaction set that we're talking about too, a little bit, will be SKU level data that we source from grocers, retailers, grocers and bodegas, smaller stores like that. Historically, we've done more of the work in the investor market. The hedge fund world has used this type of data for years, but recently retailers have realized the power of this to start asking much, much deeper and more sophisticated questions than we typically get. So why would they use that spending data to ask questions? Well, we have a 360-degree view into a consumer's wallet. That means, I got a signal from the back to increase this microphone a little bit. What that means is you can see things around customer loyalty, shopper journeys, cross-shopping preferences between different people in your wallet. And what it really does is it expands the view from outside of what you have in your consumer's wallet, which you see every day. It's pretty easy to understand what's happening. You see the transaction history at your stores, but you don't see everything that happens outside of the walls of your stores. So we can break down that other behavior and activity by channel, whether online, offline, demographic, behavioral cohorts, and lots of other ways to kind of ask questions about your consumer that you wish you knew.
So to give an example of this, let's just look at how millennials in California shop before and after going to a Dunkin' Donuts. So what you can see here is essentially we've broken down by the percentage of trips how much is going to different merchants. So beforehand, you see millennials are transacting with rideshare companies like Uber. They may be going to a big box retailer like Walmart. They may be actually going to Starbucks, maybe to do a taste test, I'm not exactly sure. But you can see then the shift after is a little bit different. You see a much higher preponderance of going to a food location like McDonald's as opposed to, maybe some of those retail outlets. So the idea here is, again, going back to what Brian was talking about, is you get a much better understanding of how your consumers are interacting both with the brands around you and potentially different categories as well. So if you go back into your mind and you say, well, what makes this group of users different from that group of users? You can get really, really granular insights using this type of data.
And a real practical answer here too is, if you're at Dunkin' Donuts, you have to wonder why people are going to Starbucks 13% of the time or 12% of the time before your trip or 13% of the time after your trip. That is a very real lost opportunity in terms of sales that is somehow leaking out to someone else.
And so ultimately, when we think about it, and I guess I should have introduced Brian and I, we're on the product team at Facteus, so this is all we think about all the time, is there's this data that we have available in this database. It's massive, it's great, and there's some users who can actually access the insights, right? They can write a query, they can put it into a visualization tool, and they can actually get these insights that we're showing here. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of users who are in the middle of a workflow, they're not necessarily technically savvy, that still have a need for these insights to drive a business decision or to drive some type of analysis that they're performing. And the question then is, how do you make it easier to access? How do you make it more usable? And that's where we've been investing significantly, and many other companies in the space are investing around the people, the skills for how to take the data and make it into insights, the data itself, but then ultimately the technology. And that's what we're here to talk about today, which is the experience of a natural language model to create an interface between the user and the actual data itself. So that's what we're going to go through. And it really started when the ChatGPT beta went out earlier this year, late last year, and we started interacting with it, asking really simple questions that we were having our customers ask us. So if you all remember, there was eggflation last year, and everyone was curious about why the price of eggs was increasing, what was the price of eggs, et cetera, et cetera. So we asked ChatGPT, what's the average spend on eggs? And it said, well, I can't actually tell you that. I don't have access to real-time data, which is very accurate. But we said this interface is really successful, right? Like people are really engaged with this interface and finding value with the speed at which it can respond to your specific query, right? And so that's where we started building out what we term at Facteus Mobius. So Mobius is our model where a user can come in, they can ask a natural language question about consumer spending data in real time and get data out, right, immediately. Not like in an hour, not tomorrow, that exact same minute. So here's what happens when you ask Mobius about the average spend on eggs, and it charts it, gives you a little blurb, and we'll go through a little bit more of that in the live demo here. So I think that's probably a good transition to actually showing you what this looks like and making it a bit more interactive. So I think, yeah, we can see screen.
Yep,
Good.
that was pretty darn seamless. So this is the actual production beta version that we have out there right now, where we'll show you a link at the end if you want to sign up and kind of get access to start testing on some of this. But we'd start with a very high-level question. Most of the time, an analyst is doing something kind of high-level to either gauge an area or understand kind of the lay of the land before they start something deeper. So very high-level question would be something like, what is the share of discretionary spend, we'll do, by generation over the past 2 years or something, 2 years, whatever, or past year. And the idea here is you're trying to understand by generational cohort. So you can see the different lines. That red top line is, I believe if we're looking at that, that's Gen Z spending the biggest share of their wallet on discretionary spending. So obviously behind the scenes, there's some work to be done to make sure that number one, it understands what discretionary spending is in the context of this. It has to understand what generations are there. And also it has to be presented in a way pretty quickly that a consumer or a customer of the data can orient themselves really quickly and understand what they're looking at. So the silent generation on the bottom in that green line spends the lowest share of their total wallet on discretionary spending. And like I said, the other end, the younger cohorts spending a lot more of their total wallet. Now, if Lorn will actually click over to the data tab, what we've done here is tried to address one of the issues that you have with putting things like large language models into production, which is where am I getting this data from? How do I trust it? Who actually thought of this question and answer? So Lorn can kind of talk through some of these tags that we're using to identify what's actually going on and figuring out that query behind the scenes.
Yeah, so to give a little bit of context here. So if you think about the Mobius workflow, essentially the user puts in a question, we go through the question, we identify concepts that are kind of key features in the data. So for example here, discretionary purchase is actually a flag in the data that says, hey, this is a discretionary purchase based on categorization that Brian mentioned. We're also going to be measuring spend in month. We're going to have some way of calculating share, so contribution versus total. We're going to plot it over time, so we need to have the sense of transaction month. And then again, breaking it out by the shopper generation, right? So these are all attributes of the database, but again, the user doesn't need to understand the way the data is structured. They don't need to know the name of the fields. They just need to ask the question and get the answer, right? And the other piece of it is you can take this data. We ultimately understand that the reality is most business users are still working in Excel, right? Like at the end of the day, this needs to eventually make its way over there. So we make it very easy to take the data table and just bring it right into Excel. So then you can go from there and start, whatever the next step of your analysis is. The other piece, though, about Mobius is not just to make it easier for everyday users, but it's also a great educational tool for some of our more advanced users as they're starting to use the data. We also expose the query that got generated by the natural language model. So again, just to give you a high-level view of how Mobius works, and we can talk after about it in more detail. We take the query, We break it into those key features I just showed you. We then put that into a model and convert that into SQL. So essentially, the actual LLM piece of this is the SQL generation. And that's what gets shown here. So the idea is to, again, help the user if they did have access to the database. How do I query that database? How is everything structured?
So we can go a level deeper here. I mentioned before that we have access to the full share of the wallet, so we can look at actual merchant level spend rather than just these kind of higher category level spends. So since the younger generations, clearly they're the ones spending more of their discretionary spend, we'll look at two companies. For this, we'll do Zara and H&M, and we'll ask Mobius to show us what the average ticket is for Zara versus H&M over the past year.
Yeah, the misspellings weren't on purpose, but yeah, it works.
So quick insights that pop out. You have H&M, that bottom line, a much lower average basket or average ticket that pops out. And Zara much higher, also much more seasonal, looks like either a spring and a fall launch or something like that. But pretty obvious that these are two different kind of targeted audiences here. Again, the idea of digging deeper is what you want to do when you're an analyst and trying to work through this workflow. You don't want to have to go back and ask for someone to generate a new query for you or do anything like that. You'd like to just be able to ask the next question. So instead of just knowing about how different these are, you want to see if there's interactions between Zara and H&M. So what's the share of Zara shoppers who also shopped at H&M in the past month? And this would be the idea of how do we actually get something like cross-shopping between two seemingly different groups to see what kind of overlap there is. All right, that was faster than I thought. That's good.
Sometimes it's fast.
So you see here that spend at Zara, 20% on average, a little higher, up to 25%, but around that 20 to 25% range of Zara shoppers also shopped at H&M in the past month before or after their purchase at Zara. That's pretty powerful because just like we talked about before with the Dunkin' example, there's clearly share of wallet that's going to someone else. You would think it's related to maybe that pricing point being different. Maybe it's just an assortment thing. We can't get into those pieces of it necessarily, but we can at least give you the breadcrumbs to show you that this looks to be a possibly distinct group of Zara users that you'd want to dig into more and understand their behavior. So to again kind of dig down one more layer, you can actually see now what do Zara shoppers who also shopped at H&M, or that's not really a good English word. Let's change that. That doesn't sound good, Lorn. Let's go to what's the average ticket for a Zara shopper who also shops at H&M? Okay, so here we now do see that this looks to be a distinct group. The Zara shoppers who also shop at H&M spend $8, around $8 less per ticket than a regular Zara shopper did. Like I said before, not telling you why they're spending less, whether it's demographics or things that you could dig more into in the future, it is at least showing you that this is a distinct group of users who clearly behave differently when they shop at Zara versus the rest of Zara's audience. So that is the extent of the demo piece of this right now, at least. We're happy to answer questions if anyone wants, but also, Lorn, you can put the link up for people who want to try to either sign up and play around with the data a little bit inside, or we're at booth 812, and you can come by and talk to us then also.